Today, we explore the extraordinary journey of Nelson Lee, a man whose life intertwined with the formidable Comanche tribe during a tumultuous time in American history. Captured in 1855, Lee endured 3 harrowing years among the Comanche before his daring escape in 1858. His experiences, chronicled in 3 years among the Comanches, provide insight into both his personal journey and the intricate dynamics of the Comanche people. In the 1850s, Native American tribes, including the Comanche, fiercely defended their territories against the relentless westward expansion of settlers. The Great Plains, stretching from modern-day Kansas to western Texas and New Mexico, were rife with conflict, as native raiding parties targeted border settlements to resist encroachment. It was during this volatile period that Nelson Lee, in his late 40s, embarked on a life-changing journey. Beginning his career as a sailor in the Navy, Lee later joined the Texas Rangers. His exploits included service during the Mexican-American War, which reshaped the American Southwest and extended the U.S. border deep into Mexican territory. After the war, he settled near Corpus Christi, Texas, earning a modest living through cattle trading and wild horse capture. It was in this frontier town that his fate intertwined with the Comanche. The Comanche were not merely a nomadic horse tribe. They were masters of the plains, an unparalleled cavalry force shaped by centuries of adaptation. The introduction of horses by the Spanish in the 1500s transformed their way of life, allowing them to rise to dominance over nearly 2 centuries. By the 1800s, they had established themselves as the most formidable native power in the Southwest, known as the Lords of the Southern Plains. Unlike the semi-agricultural Apache, who retained some farming practices, the Comanche fully embraced a nomadic horse culture. Horses became central to their economy, warfare, and identity, enabling them to strike with incredible speed and precision. Their raids against settlers and rival tribes were often executed under the cover of night, allowing for devastating surprise attacks. Yet, the Comanche story is not solely one of violence. It is a narrative of resilience, rooted in a collective memory of displacement. Their rise as a dominant force exemplified adaptation and survival, even amidst external threats. As we examine Nelson Lee's story, it serves as a reflection of broader themes of native resilience and the complexities of cultural collision on the frontier. His encounters with the Comanche embody not just personal trials, but also the enduring strength and richness of native cultures during a transformative period in American history. In 1855, Nelson Lee and his companion William Aiken undertook a daring yet reckless mission to drive a herd of mules westward from Corpus Christi, Texas, with the aim of reaching a mysterious destination that Lee called Matamoros. While historical maps show no clear indication of such a town in California, their intended route was bound to intersect a significant reality. They would be traversing the very heart of Comanche territory, an area infamous for its dangers and unpredictability. At the time, the Comanche's range was well documented, often labeled on maps as hazardous and even impassable for settlers. Nonetheless, Aiken was firmly convinced they could successfully navigate through this perilous region and make considerable profits from their venture. This belief was more based on unwarranted optimism than sound judgment. The Great Plains were not merely an obstacle, they were the sovereign domain of the Comanche, a tribe that had mastered the land for generations and defended it fiercely. Lee and Aiken, ignoring the warnings, gathered a group of hired hands and set off on horseback, driving their mules west along the Rio Grande. Lee, always practical, invested in a cutting-edge pocket watch, a rare and costly item for that period. This watch, which could chime like an alarm, represented his commitment to maintaining strict discipline and organizing their journey. Each day at exactly 3:30 a.m., the watch would prompt the start of their exhausting trek, helping the group work efficiently and make the best use of daylight. Their journey commenced in early March, with the group moving steadily westward. The Rio Grande, with its stretches of lush grasslands, provided an essential resource for their mules, whose endurance was critical for the expedition's success. However, despite careful planning, their choice to venture into Comanche territory revealed a serious misjudgment of the dangers they faced. By April, they arrived southwest of El Paso and chose to let their mules rest for several weeks. This seemed a sensible decision. Well-fed and rested mules were vital for the tough miles ahead. Yet pausing here, deep in Comanche territory, proved to be a dangerous gamble. Although they stationed sentinels each night to watch for threats, their efforts were ultimately useless against the skilled raiders they were about to confront. The Comanche, masters of ambush and stealth, were notorious for striking with deadly accuracy and without any notice. Their deep understanding of the land allowed them to be nearly invisible, a looming threat until it was too late. For Lee and his team, entering Comanche territory was not merely a logistical challenge. It was also a daring act of defiance against a tribe whose influence over the southern plains was unrivaled. What followed would highlight the danger of underestimating the strength of the Comanche. April 2nd, 1855, marked a night that Nelson Lee would never forget. Around 1 a.m., after completing his patrol, he set his alarm and lay down to rest, unaware that everything was about to change. The tranquil silence of the camp was suddenly disrupted by horrifying screams. In the dim flicker of the campfire, Lee caught fleeting glimpses of dark-painted figures slipping through the chaos like shadows. It was a Comanche raid. The sentinels, either taken by surprise or incapacitated, failed to provide any warning. Before Lee could react, he was lassoed, pulled to the ground, and quickly bound by Comanche warriors. All around him, the camp descended into chaos. Shouts, whoops, and the dull thud of tomahawks echoed as the raiders moved from tent to tent. Of the group, only 4 men survived: Nelson Lee, William Aiken, and 2 hired hands, Thomas Martin and John Stewart. The rest met a violent end. The survivors were stripped of their clothes and dressed in traditional Comanche attire, buckskin leggings and hunting shirts. While the raiders ransacked the camp, they discovered Lee's pocket watch, an intricate and rare item at the time. Intrigued by the watch, they urged Lee to demonstrate how it worked. When it chimed, their amazement was clear. Cleverly, Lee seized the opportunity, solemnly winding the watch and making it chime again, thereby creating an air of mystery and reverence. He later recounted that the Comanche might have perceived the watch as a supernatural object, possibly linked to the Great Spirit. As daylight broke, the horrifying reality of the raid unfolded. Lee described the aftermath in chilling detail. Bodies were gruesomely mutilated, disemboweled, scalped, and left behind, as a stark warning of the Comanche's psychological warfare prowess. Fresh scalps adorned the belts of the warriors, serving as a grim testament to their dominance in the region. For Lee and his companions, the journey into captivity became a harrowing introduction to the Comanche's techniques of psychological and physical control. To instill terror, the captors would faintly simulate scalping, waving bloody tomahawks, tugging at the captive's hair, and mimicking the act of scalping, only to halt just before completion. These actions were not simply acts of cruelty. They served as demonstrations of control and constant reminders of the captive's helplessness. Traveling with the Comanche was a brutal ordeal aimed at dehumanizing the captives. Their faces were obscured by deerskins, with small holes cut out near the mouth for minimal breathing. Bound hand and foot, they were strapped to mules. If a captive fell, they would dangle helplessly, their legs tied to the animal. The Comanche took pleasure in their suffering, as Lee recounted how his attempts to somersault off the mule became a source of laughter and mockery. Even mealtime was infused with intimidation, as boiling chunks of horseflesh were thrown at the captives, burning their skin. This mealtime ritual served as both sustenance and a method of asserting dominance, keeping the captives on edge and stripped of their dignity. The nights provided little respite, as the captives were forced to lie on their backs, hands and feet tied to stakes, with buffalo hides secured around their throats, rendering them immobile and sleepless. While Lee's account highlights the terror and brutality he endured, it is crucial to recognize the broader context. Though horrifying to settlers, the actions of the Comanche were rooted in their struggle for survival in a rapidly changing world. As a people who had faced displacement and marginalization prior to their rise to prominence, their fierce resistance to settlers represented their ongoing fight to protect their way of life. The raid was not merely an act of violence, but a strategic assertion of control over their territory. By instilling fear in outsiders, the Comanche communicated a clear message. Their land was not to be crossed without consequence. Nelson Lee's harrowing account continues with the grim realities of his captivity. After days of exhausting travel, the Comanche subjected their captives to unimaginable physical and psychological torment. Lee describes being forced to lie flat on his back, with his arms and legs tightly bound to stakes driven into the ground. To further immobilize him, buffalo hide was tied under his chin, securing his neck to the ground. This cruel restraint rendered him unable to move head, hand, or foot. A living straitjacket that deprived him of rest and added to his anguish. These conditions persisted for 4 grueling days. When not restrained, Lee and the other captives endured equally dehumanizing treatment. Blindfolded and tied to mules, they faced perilous rides where branches and rough terrain frequently caused them to fall. Lee recounts how the Comanche mocked his misfortunes, treating his somersaults as comedic entertainment. Even meals were transformed into instruments of humiliation, with boiling chunks of horse meat hurled at the captives, burning their skin as they scrambled for the searing morsels. This relentless cycle of physical discomfort and ridicule emphasized the captors' dominance. On the 4th day, the captives reached what Lee described as a sprawling Comanche village. Although he estimated there were about 500 people and hundreds of tents, it's possible this figure was exaggerated due to his fear and awe. The captives were marched through the camp and ultimately brought before the Comanche chief called Big Wolf. This leader, whose name conveyed strength and mystery, had heard of Lee's unusual pocket watch and insisted on seeing it in action. Lee's reaction to the chief's demand highlighted his quick thinking and desperation. He claimed that if the watch were to chime at that moment, it would wreck the world, skillfully playing on the Comanche's spiritual regard for the unknown to avert immediate danger. Although Big Wolf seemed skeptical, he decided not to pursue the matter further, providing Lee with a brief respite. However, this moment of relief was short-lived. Lee was taken outside the village, where a terrifying ritual awaited him. His fellow captives, Akin, Martin, and Stewart, were already present, bound and stripped of their clothing. They were tied to tall posts with their hands raised high by ropes. Martin and Stewart stood next to each other, while Akin faced them. Lee, too, was stripped and bound alongside Akin, forming a grim scene. The stage was set for yet another brutal chapter in Lee's ordeal, one that would further test his strength and will to survive. What followed was a chilling exhibition of Comanche warrior culture. In a synchronized display, warriors armed with tomahawks, knives, and flint spearheads circled the captives. The ceremony commenced with two warriors stepping forward to scalp Martin and Stewart, removing small patches of skin roughly the size of a silver dollar. Both men, still alive, bled profusely, their anguished cries resonating through the clearing. The warriors continued to circle, letting out war whoops as they passed by, brandishing their weapons and dragging flint spearheads across the bodies of Martin and Stewart. Each pass inflicted more wounds, leaving the men battered and bloodied. The torment was systematic and relentless, as the warriors seemed to draw strength and purpose from the brutality. To Lee and Aiken's astonishment, they remained unharmed throughout the horrifying spectacle. The warriors walked past them numerous times, sparing them while directing their cruelty solely at Martin and Stewart. Later, Lee reflected on the scene with haunting words. How many times they circled round, halting, the sound of war whoop, and going through the same demonic exercise, I cannot tell. The psychological toll of witnessing such violence, coupled with the dread of his own fate, left an indelible mark on Lee's mind. For the settlers, these actions appeared as unprovoked savagery. However, within the framework of Comanche culture, such rituals held a deeper significance. These displays of dominance and brutality were not random acts of violence. They were affirmations of power, unity, and control. For a people who had faced centuries of displacement and marginalization, exerting authority over captives was a means of reversing roles, a way to reclaim agency in an ever-changing world. For Lee, though, the ceremony signified a plunge into a living nightmare. His survival was a precarious thread, dependent on both his captors' dispositions and his ability to navigate their intricate social and spiritual dynamics. This episode, entwining ritualized terror with psychological warfare, starkly illustrates the lengths to which the Comanche went to uphold their sovereignty and demonstrate their strength. The torment that the Comanche inflicted on Nelson Lee and his fellow captives escalated to a horrifying peak as the ritual progressed. Lee described the scene with haunting clarity. They assisted in a hellish work until every inch of the bodies of the unhappy men was hacked and covered with clotted blood. The ordeal became so unbearable for Lee that he yearned for the ability to choose his own death rather than face the relentless cruelty of the Comanche. This harrowing episode highlights the psychological and cultural dimensions inherent in the Comanche's rituals. As noted by author S.C. Gwynn in Empire of the Summer Moon, the Comanche were not only willing to inflict pain, they reveled in it. Gwynn states, not only did they inflict horrific suffering, but by all evidence they enjoyed it. Making people scream in pain was fun for them. It was an important part of their adult culture, and one they accepted without challenge. Between their acts of violence, the Comanche would take moments to smoke tobacco and taunt their captives. They mocked Martin for praying and highlighted the severe wounds inflicted on him and Stewart. These breaks were brief, as the ceremony soon transitioned into a chilling war dance. Two warriors circled the captives before wielding their hatchets to deliver fatal strikes to Martin and Stewart, crushing their skulls in a swift and brutal manner. The bodies were tossed aside without ceremony, leaving Lee and Aiken bound and anticipating their own grim fates. Surprisingly, the ritual concluded, and they were spared for reasons Lee couldn't understand. The psychological impact of witnessing such brutality left deep scars on Lee, but he held on to a glimmer of hope for survival. His pocket watch, which the Comanche regarded as a supernatural artifact, became a vital source of leverage. As Akeen later suggested, Lee's willingness to cooperate, coupled with the watch's mystical reputation, could enhance his chances of survival. A kin remarked, "They believed it to be a living spirit in a silver body." This belief, along with Lee's quick thinking, would prove essential in his eventual escape from peril. Insight became Lee's crucial lifeline, but Akin would not share his fate. Sent to a different camp, Akin bid Lee a brief farewell, imparting his final words of wisdom. After that moment, Lee never saw Akin again, and he was presumed dead. The ensuing years would shape Lee's journey around survival, resilience, and an unwavering determination to escape. Over the next 3 years, Lee lived among various Comanche tribes. His pocket watch retained its revered status, traveling with him as a mystical object. Following Akin's guidance, Lee adapted to his surroundings, becoming a servant to Big Wolf and other tribal leaders. He carried out various tasks, gradually earning their trust. In time, he was allowed to move freely within the camp, and even to carry a knife, a significant elevation in his status. Big Wolf's tribe bestowed the nickname Chumako upon Lee, meaning the good white man. Although Lee's relationship with the tribe varied, he still endured cruelty, particularly from a master known as Spotted Leopard, who severely injured him after a failed attempt to escape. Nevertheless, moments of compassion emerged, particularly from women like a Comanche named Sleek Otter, who shielded him from the wrath of the warriors. Lee's chance for freedom arose during a journey with a chief named Rolling Thunder. Ironically, the trip aimed to address the increasing threat posed by white settlers encroaching on Comanche land. Seizing his opportunity, Lee grabbed a hatchet and struck Rolling Thunder, embedding the dull edge into the chief's skull. He later recounted, "Snatching the hatchet in that moment from its place, I leapt toward the chief and buried the dull edge of a broad hand's breadth into his brain." With the chief incapacitated, Lee armed himself with a rifle and knife, mounted a horse, and fled into the wild. His escape marked the end of a 3-year ordeal, showcasing his resilience and resourcefulness. Nelson Lee's escape was not just a test of endurance, it was a profound exercise of will. He seized his opportunity for freedom with determination, writing, "A moment was enough to draw the rifle from beneath him and jerk the long knife from his girdle. Then, mounting my horse, I dashed wildly away over an unknown path toward the land of freedom." His flight heralded the start of a perilous journey through a harsh wilderness as he sought refuge in the Mexican state of Chihuahua. Navigating the vast, rugged terrain of the Southwest presented its challenges. Lee faced natural obstacles at every turn. Cliffs, mountains, and dense brush continually forced him to backtrack. Signs of other native groups kept him vigilant, as he understood that avoiding recapture was vital to his survival. By day, he relied on the sun to guide him southward. By night, the North Star served as his compass. Despite his resourcefulness, the isolation and brutality of the landscape began to weigh heavily on him. Weeks into his escape, Lee's physical and emotional resilience started to diminish. He described his condition in chilling detail. "I was sick in body as well as soul. My limbs had become swollen, and the wounds and bruises covering me were inflamed and painful. Each day, I grew weaker as I pressed on. Often I prayed to God that I might not wake up again when I fell asleep." These words reflect the deep despair he was experiencing, isolated from civilization and uncertain of his survival. After nearly a month on the run, even Lee's horse, his most essential companion, succumbed to fatigue. Forced to leave the animal behind, he continued on foot, expressing, "Now, for the first time, my heart died within me. From what I could tell, civilization was as distant as it had been when I began my journey. Doubts crept in. and I started to fear that I might be losing my sanity. Exhausted and alone, Lee pressed on, fueled solely by his resolve. The wilderness seemed to work against him at every turn. Rattlesnakes and other predators lurked in the shadows, attracted by the scent of his kills from previous hunts. Even the simple act of starting a fire for cooking or warmth became a dangerous gamble. The flames could be seen from a long distance and might reveal his position. Yet, in spite of the overwhelming challenges, Lee's unwavering will to survive propelled him forward, one arduous step at a time. Upon arriving in San Fernando, Lee received care from a local doctor. He spent 6 weeks recuperating, gradually regaining his strength and recovering from the physical and emotional burdens of his harrowing experience. His wounds were treated, his body replenished, and he was given the opportunity to reflect on the incredible journey he had undergone. When Lee finally boarded a boat headed for New York, it signified the end of 3 long and trying years. His time with the Comanche, characterized by captivity, survival, and eventual escape, was over. The northward journey was not just a return to familiar lands. It symbolized his re-entry into a life of freedom and security, a stark contrast to the brutal realities of the frontier. Lee's story stands as both a tribute to human resilience and a reminder of the compassion that can emerge even in the most unforgiving conditions. The kindness shown by the Mexican hunters, who chose to save a stranger, ensured that Lee would survive to share his remarkable tale, a narrative of survival, endurance, and the unyielding desire to return home. In 1858, Nelson Lee found himself once again on the familiar soil of the East Coast, far from the rugged and wild frontier where he had faced unimaginable challenges. As he reflected on his journey, Lee's story became a poignant reminder of the strength of the human spirit and the enduring hope for freedom, even amidst overwhelming adversity. At last, I was home, and my time among the Indians had come to an end forever. Though the memories of the agonizing scenes and suffering I had witnessed would stay with me always. These words reflect the conflicting emotions Lee carried: the relief of returning to safety and the lingering weight of the horrors he had endured. His escape from the Comanche and his eventual return to civilization were not just the end of years of hardship. They marked the start of a new chapter in his life. Settling into the relative peace of the East Coast, he no longer faced the constant threat of violence that had defined his years on the frontier. The trauma of captivity, the loss of his companions, and the brutal realities of life among the Comanche were behind him, but they remained deeply imprinted in his mind. Determined to ensure his experiences were not forgotten, Lee began writing his memoir, 3 Years Among the Comanches. The book was more than just a personal account of survival. It was a vivid portrayal of life on the frontier. It provided readers with a window into the cultural clashes between settlers and native tribes, the harsh realities of captivity, and the resilience needed to endure such trials. Lee's story struck a chord in a nation wrestling with the challenges of westward expansion and the violent conflicts it often brought. Lee's journey from captivity to freedom captures the complexities of the 19th century American frontier, a place of opportunity, danger, and cultural collisions. His story reflects not only his personal strength, but also the broader tensions between settlers and native tribes during this turbulent era. While his return to the East Coast marked the end of his physical struggles, it also symbolized his transformation from a participant in the raw, violent realities of the West to a storyteller of its history. Through his memoir, Lee ensured that the voices of his companions, the rugged beauty of the frontier, and even the practices of his Comanche captors would not be forgotten. His survival and the legacy of his writing serve as a powerful reminder of the human capacity to endure and the importance of preserving the stories of those who lived through some of history's most difficult moments. By sharing his story, Lee not only reclaimed his own narrative, but also contributed to a deeper understanding of the frontier's complexities, leaving behind a lasting testament to the resilience of the human spirit.